You don't need any previous experience with the Prince of Persia series to enjoy playing through Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. In fact, you don't need pretty much anything. You just need a pulse and senses. This is really just an impressive game altogether that looks great, controls very well, has a lot of very cool and original mechanics, and just is a pleasure from start to finish. The game is also surprisingly easy to play through. Despite the sort of incredibly daring moves that you'll see the character routinely pull off, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time is very forgiving. It's very accessible, much more so than a lot of games out there, so this really is a game that you can put into the hands of, a relative non-gamer, and that person would still have a lot of fun with it. So while Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time doesn't have the punishing level of difficulty that the original Prince of Persia game had, it does really capture the spirit of action-adventure gaming quite perfectly. The game is set in sort of a storybook version of the Middle East. The whole game is bathed in this sort of soft, warm lighting and just has a really amazing look to it, even from the get-go. There's this very slick motion blur effect, and when combined with the soft ambient lighting, it makes the game look like part Hong Kong action movie and part storybook to make for a very unique appearance overall. And much like in the original Prince of Persia game, the animation here is just extraordinary. You'll see the main character pull off some really amazing stuff, and still images just don't do the game justice. It really is a game that is nearly as entertaining to watch as it is to play, just from seeing this main character run along walls and make these huge death-defying leaps and just move about so quickly and yet seemingly so realistically is just something that doesn't cease to be impressive even as you're many hours into the game. Throughout the game you play as the prince, who early on steals this artifact called the Dagger of Time. Unfortunately for him, the prince is tricked into using the Dagger of Time to unlock the Sands of Time, which is this big hourglass that spills forth its sands and turns the entire palace into sand creatures, these kind of demonic sand zombies, for lack of a better way to describe them. There are seemingly only 3 survivors: himself, a woman named Farah, and the evil vizier, who's the one who's manipulating the throne and the prince and trying to become immortal. So the prince is going to set out to right his wrongs and defeat the vizier and hopefully escape along with Farah. You never actually play as Farah, but she figures prominently into the plot and into some of the puzzle-solving sequences. She's even skinnier than the prince is, so she can slip through certain cracks and pull levers, do things like that to help the prince out in certain situations. The two of them will help each other throughout much of the game, and you'll even fight alongside her in many of the game's battles. But really, for the most part, Prince of Persia consists of 3 types of things: exploring and navigating the game's environments, combat, and puzzle solving. The exploration and navigation portion of the game is the most common and the most enjoyable overall. You'll use the prince's various acrobatic skills to avoid traps and to reach places which seem like they shouldn't be reachable by any normal person. You can see the prince kind of tightrope walking, jumping onto ladders, running alongside walls, running up walls, doing all kinds of really incredible looking stunts that make him seem almost like a Middle Eastern version of Spider-Man, if anything. Controlling these impressive abilities is remarkably simple. The controls are practically intuitive, and early on in the game you'll learn these various maneuvers, and then it's just a matter of putting it all together. Avoiding traps and otherwise avoiding certain death is just a matter of simple timing. You push the jump button at the right moment, for instance, while running alongside a wall, and you'll leap off of it and vault onto a ladder nearby or something like that. Gravity does take its toll on the prince after a while, so you can indeed fall to your death, and you probably will often, but even there the prince has a trick up his sleeve. The Dagger of Time most notably allows him to rewind time back to a point before which he died, allowing you to try again and avoid your demise. It's a pretty neat trick that keeps the game from ever getting too frustrating. And even if your dagger does run out of power and you kind of die permanently, you're not set back very far. You just get to try that same sequence again. Actually, the game is told as sort of a retrospective from the prince's perspective. When you die permanently, you'll hear him say something like, "No, that's not how it happened," as though he's telling the story to someone. And this sort of keeps you from getting too discouraged, because you know really that he made it in the end, and you'll keep trying until you get it. In fact, no sequence in the game is particularly hard. The timing is quite simple, and the combat in Prince of Persia is also pretty easy the whole time through. That's for two reasons. One is that the enemies, these sand creatures you'll fight, are quite slow. They'll teleport in close to the prince and will crowd around him, but will attack pretty infrequently. Secondly, the prince himself is just very, very quick and capable of executing some pretty nasty combat moves. Most notably, he can kind of vault over his enemies and slash them in the back on his way down, and he could also execute a really effective kind of off-the-wall dive that tends to knock his enemies flat. Between these two moves, virtually no enemy in the game poses much of a challenge, so combat actually before the game is done becomes a bit repetitive and maybe even a bit tedious, though it still, like the rest of the game, controls remarkably well and is really impressive to look at. As for the puzzle-solving portions, they're pretty straightforward, kind of block-pushing, lever-throwing affairs that you may have seen in other action-adventure games, though the presence of Farah does make some of these sequences sort of more interesting. Plus, the environments in the game are just so detailed and nice to look at that the puzzle-solving is sort of inherently enjoyable that way. This is a game whose presentation really makes a very big difference to how enjoyable it is. If the game weren't animated this well or just didn't look this good or sound this good overall, it wouldn't have been as entertaining. But hey, it is. It looks fantastic. It's just really a pleasure to see each new area in the game. Some of them are these big, wide-open outdoor areas. Some of them are indoors and some rather mystical-looking locations. There's a good amount of variety to the environments, and all of the environments just look fantastic. Prince of Persia is about 10 hours long, though it doesn't have much replay value to it. By the time you're through with the game, you'll have mastered the various techniques needed to finish the game, and there won't be much reason to go back and play through the generally linear levels. On the other hand, there are some bonus features, including a port of the original Prince of Persia game, which is still fun in this day and age and makes a pretty sharp contrast to Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, with its extremely punishing and unforgiving difficulty. So Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time really isn't the most challenging or the longest lasting game out there, but on the other hand, it features an incomparable presentation and some very cool moves for its main character. And the level of difficulty is such that the game can be recommended wholeheartedly pretty much to anyone out there, so be sure not to miss it.